The arms that came out of the golden era were not a product of better genetics. They were a product of better information. Information that was never fully written down, never handed off cleanly, and mostly died with the era that created it. You've seen the routines. Curls, press downs, skull crushers. That's not what built Don Howard's arms. That's not what built Larry Scott's biceps or Dave Draper's 20-inch cannons. What built those physiques was everything that happened around those exercises, the grip adjustments, the elbow positions, the loading methods, the brutal finishers that happened after the main work was done. Nobody filmed those details. Nobody put them in a magazine column. This video is 16 of them. Some are grip tricks, so subtle they won't look like anything until you feel the difference. Some are loading strategies the current science crowd has quietly buried because they don't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. And there's one near the end of this list that completely rewrites how you should be thinking about arm day entirely. Don't skip ahead. Number 1. Offset grip dumbbell curls. Most people grab a dumbbell exactly in the center. That's the wrong place to hold it for arm development, and the old school lifters knew it. Shifting your grip toward the thumb side, away from the pinky, changes everything about the mechanics. The dumbbell becomes unbalanced in a way your hand can feel immediately. It wants to rotate. It wants to tip. And your forearm flexors and biceps have to work continuously just to stabilize the weight, producing a level of muscular effort that a center grip never creates. Dave Draper didn't talk about this in magazine articles. This was gym knowledge. The kind passed around verbally at Gold's Venice in the early 1970s, when the serious men were training before the tourists showed up. It looks like nothing on film. It feels brutally different the second you try it. Change your grip half an inch. Your arms won't feel the same for a week. Number 2. Forward lean press downs with elbows slightly ahead. The way press downs are taught now. Upright torso, elbows pinned to the sides, bar moving in a perfect arc, is not how the best triceps in the golden era were actually trained. That strict version came later, out of the biomechanics obsession of the 1990s and early 2000s. The old school version was different. Lean forward. Let the elbows sit slightly in front of the body instead of directly at the sides. What this does is shift the line of resistance, so the long head of the triceps, the biggest of the 3 heads, the one that gives the arm its hanging thickness when relaxed, is forced to contribute. When you stand upright with the elbows pinned to the ribs, the long head is on vacation. Boyer Co., who had some of the most complete triceps development of the late 1970s, trained press downs with this forward lean position as a deliberate setup choice. He wasn't being sloppy. He was solving a problem that the strict version leaves entirely unaddressed. The irony is that the current correct form actually makes press downs worse. That's not an opinion. Feel the difference yourself and then argue with it. Number 3. Supinating before you curl, not during. Every beginner is taught to start with neutral grip and rotate the palm upward as the weight comes up. That's standard. It's also incomplete. The old school technique, used consistently by Larry Scott, whose biceps were arguably the best of any man who ever competed in the sport, was to aggressively supinate the wrist before the curl begins. Fully turned out, pinky side of the hand rotating away from the body as hard as possible. Then maintain that rotational intent throughout the entire range of motion, like you're trying to pull the weight apart as you curl it. What you're doing is pre-activating the supinator function of the biceps before the load is applied. The biceps doesn't just flex the elbow, it supinates the forearm, and that supinating force is where a significant portion of its development actually comes from. Scott knew this. His trainer, Vince Garanda, knew it. They exploited it deliberately for years before anyone in the fitness press could explain it in anatomical terms. Start rotated. Stay rotated. Feel what your biceps actually are. Number 4. Stretch-loaded overhead extensions. Before loaded stretch became a phrase that social media trainers put on every other post, the golden era bodybuilders were doing it with a single dumbbell behind their heads, going as deep as their shoulders and elbows would allow, and spending real time in that bottom position, not bouncing, not rushing, staying there. The long head of the triceps, the largest of 3, crosses the shoulder joint. That means it only achieves a true full stretch when the arm is raised overhead. Every press down, Every kickback, every close grip bench press done with the elbows at the sides shortens the long head before it even starts working. That is the fundamental problem with how most people train triceps. They never fully stretch the muscle they're trying to build. The overhead dumbbell extension fixes that. One dumbbell, both hands cupped beneath the inner plate, arms raised overhead, elbows bent and pointing at the ceiling. The descent should feel like the muscle is being pulled apart. That's a sensation that signals actual mechanical loading in a lengthened position. The golden era men went lighter than you'd expect on this movement. Robby Robinson, who had some of the most aesthetic arms in the sport at his peak in the late 1970s, used weights here that would embarrass most modern gym goers chasing numbers. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was milking tension exactly where the muscle needed it. The reason this has been largely abandoned is simple. It requires patience, body awareness, and the willingness to use modest weight in a movement that looks modest. Those are three things modern commercial gym culture has no interest in promoting. You don't get likes for overhead extensions with 40 pounds. You get results. Number 5. Drag curls. The regular barbell curl gives the front deltoid an enormous opportunity to steal work from the biceps. The arm path swings the bar forward and up in an arc, which means at the top of the movement, the front delt is in its strongest position and the biceps is running out of leverage. Anyone who's ever watched a guy curl 135 pounds knows exactly what this looks like. The drag curl eliminates that theft entirely. Instead of curling the bar forward and up an arc, you drag it straight up the body. Elbows move backward as the bar travels upward, staying in contact or near contact with the torso the whole time. There is no arc. There is no swing. The front deltoid can't get involved because the movement pattern never enters its territory. This was a staple at Vince's gym on Ventura Boulevard. Garanda prescribed it specifically for bodybuilders whose curls have become more of a deltoid exercise than a biceps exercise, which, if you're honest with yourself, is most of the people you've ever seen curling. The contraction produces in the upper biceps is unlike any standard curl variation. Denser, more complete. It sits in a different part of the muscle. It doesn't look impressive in motion. It doesn't feel impressive compared to swinging a loaded bar. That's exactly why it works, and exactly why the modern gym dropped at the moment spectacle became more important than results. Number 6. Crossbody triceps extensions. Here's something you almost certainly haven't seen programmed anywhere in the last decade. Take a dumbbell or a cable handle and extend across the body, not straight down, not straight overhead, but diagonally across the torso toward the opposite hip. The elbow bends and the hand comes to roughly the opposite shoulder, then extends back out on the same diagonal line. The change in pull direction isolates parts of the triceps that standard movements consistently miss. All three heads of the triceps contribute to elbow extension, but the angle at which resistance is applied determines which head has to work hardest. Straight down press downs hit one distribution. Overhead extensions hit another. Crossbody extensions carve out a third zone entirely. Ed Corney, who had exceptional arm development and one of the most complete overall physiques of the mid-1970s, incorporated unusual unilateral movements like this specifically to address weak zones that bilateral exercises smoothed over. He had the patience for detail work that most lifters don't. This movement never became popular because it doesn't look powerful. Nothing that looks like you're reaching across a table is going to get promoted in a magazine. The results, though, are the reason it should have survived. Stop for a second. There's a common thread through everything covered so far, and if you've missed it, you're going to miss the point of this entire video. Every single one of these tricks makes the exercise harder without adding weight to the bar. That is exactly the opposite of how modern gym culture tells you to progress. Add weight, chase numbers. Film the PR. The men who built the best arms in history were chasing a feeling, a specific muscular sensation, and manipulating every variable they could find to produce it. Weight was just one variable. Often it was the least interesting one. Back to the list. Because what comes next is where the old school advantage really starts to separate itself. Number 7. Thick bar training for arms. This is the one that nobody writes about properly, So let's be direct about what actually happens when you wrap your hands around a 2-inch or 3-inch diameter bar instead of a standard Olympic bar. A standard barbell has a diameter of roughly 1 inch. That's thin enough that most people can close their hand entirely around it, which means a hand and forearm are in a passive grip position. The smaller hand muscles are not being maximally recruited, and the neural drive into the arm is relatively relaxed. A thick bar changes this immediately. The hand can't close around it. Every muscle in the forearm and hand fires to maintain grip, and the neural signal into the upper arm elevates as a direct result of that full hand recruitment. This was understood practically, not theoretically, by the men training at Gold's and the World Gym in the 1970s. Thick handles were used on pulley machines. Fat-handled dumbbells existed. The old York barbell equipment had handles that varied in diameter depending on the piece. It wasn't a system. It was just equipment that was available, and the men who trained with it noticed that their arm development came along faster than expected. Bill Pearl, who had forearms that looked like they'd been grafted from a different species, trained with thick implements consistently throughout his career. Pearl's grip strength was exceptional even by the standards of the era, and that grip strength directly supported the arm size and density he was able to build. The connection is not coincidental. The modern equivalent is fat grips, or a towel wrapped around a barbell handle. You don't need specialty equipment. Wrap a small towel around your next set of curls and do the same weight you normally use. The difference in muscle activation is immediate, and the soreness in the forearms and upper arms afterward will tell you something important about where your arm development has been leaving gains behind. And later in this video, I'll show you a loading method that makes thick bar curls look almost gentle by comparison. Number 8. 1.5 reps on skull crushers. Skull crushers have been producing more elbow tendon injuries than actual triceps development for the last 30 years. The reason is that most people load them too heavy, lower the bar too fast, and treat the movement as a test of how much they can swing back up rather than a tool for developing the long head of the triceps under maximum mechanical tension. The golden era fix for this was a 1.5 rep. Lower the bar to the forehead or behind the head. The old school prefer behind, which increases the long head stretch further. Press halfway up, return to the bottom, then lock out fully. That's 1 rep. The extended time in the stretch position is what the full exercise is designed to exploit, and the half rep forces you to visit that position twice per rep instead of rushing through it once on your way back up. Casey Viator, who had extraordinary arm development before his 20th birthday and remains one of the most impressive physical specimens in the sport's history, used extended time methods on triceps isolation work as a deliberate intensity amplifier. His sessions at Arthur Jones's facility in Florida in the early 1970s were documented to include exactly this kind of mechanical manipulation, holding, pausing, returning to the hardest part of the movement before completing the rep. The 1.5 rep also self-limits the weight you can use. That's a feature, not a bug. Number 9. Bracing the upper arm against a fixed surface. The preacher bench gets all the credit here, but the concept is older and broader than any single piece of equipment. The purpose of the preacher bench is to prevent the upper arm from swinging backward during the curl. To eliminate the escape route the body always finds when a weight gets heavy. But the preacher bench is not the only way to accomplish this, and it's not always the best way. Golden era bodybuilders used their own thigh. They sat on a bench, planted the elbow firmly against the inner quad, and performed concentration curls with the braced arm locked against the leg. The upper arm couldn't move. The cheating couldn't happen. The biceps had nowhere to run. Larry Scott built the biceps that won him the first 2 Mr. Olympia titles, 1965 and 1966, with a combination of preacher work and thigh-brace concentration curls that trapped every ounce of tension exactly where it needed to be. Scott's arms at their peak were so far ahead of the competition that judges at the time struggled to score his nearest rivals fairly. The less obvious variation was the incline brace. Set a bench to about 45 degrees, drape the upper arm over the top edge of the pad, and curl from there. The edge of the pad acts as the brace. The movement feels like a hybrid between a preacher curl and a concentration curl. Tight, precise, punishing. Men like Dennis Tenorino and Frank Zane use incline brace curls during detail phases before major competitions specifically because the movement left no room for momentum. What all of these share is a simple principle. The moment you remove the upper arm's ability to travel backward during a curl, the biceps has to do the entire job. The training culture of the last 2 decades has moved so strongly toward free, unbraced movement, in the name of functional training, that this basic act of controlling the lever is treated with suspicion. It's not a limitation. It's precision. Number 10. Cable curls from behind the body. This one requires you to set up a low cable pulley and then walk forward. Not stand in front of it, but position yourself so the cable runs behind you. The arm start in a position where the shoulder is slightly extended. The biceps is in a stretched state before the movement even begins. And the resistance curve is entirely different from anything a dumbbell or barbell can produce. The reason this matters is mechanical. A dumbbell's resistance is always vertical. It pulls straight down regardless of your position. A cable's resistance follows the line of the cable. When that cable runs behind you, it applies tension to the biceps in its lengthened position, which is where the muscle has the most potential to produce force and where the stimulus for growth is most concentrated. Vince Gironda understood cable mechanics better than most coaches of any era. His gym had cable setups configured specifically to attack muscles from unusual angles that free weights couldn't replicate. The behind body cable curl was one of the movements that came out of that philosophy, a solution to the problem that barbells and dumbbells simply cannot provide peak tension at the stretch position. Every free weight curl applies its maximum resistance at roughly the midpoint of the movement, where the muscle is already partway through its shortening. The cable setup from behind corrects this problem at the source. The set feels completely different from any standing curl. If you've only ever curled with free weights, your first set from behind the body will feel like you've been curling wrong your entire life. You have been. The next 3 entries are the ones that matter most. These aren't grip adjustments or setup tweaks. These are methodology shifts, the way the golden era men structure their training at a systems level. One of them directly contradicts something you've almost certainly been told about arm training in the last 10 years. 2 of them are flat out counterintuitive. Pay attention to the last one especially. Number 11. Soft lockouts for pump sets. On higher rep sets, anything above 15 reps, the golden era standard was to stop just short of full elbow lockout on every rep. Not dramatically short, a few degrees, enough to prevent the triceps from resting during triceps work and the biceps from resting during curl work. The effect is blood trapping. The muscle can't fully decompress at the top of the movement, which keeps intramuscular pressure elevated throughout the set. You're forcing the muscle into a continuous state of partial contraction, even during what should be the recovery point of each rep. Men training in the Venice beach scene in the early 1970s used this method deliberately on pump finishers, never on heavy sets, always on a light to moderate work done later in the session. Heavy work first, then trap the blood. The 2 phases were treated as entirely different tools serving entirely different purposes within the same workout. The soft lockout was only ever applied in the second phase. Using it on heavy set defeats the purpose and adds nothing. The distinction matters. Number 12. Reverse grip extensions and press downs. Nobody does these because they're uncomfortable and you have to drop the weight significantly. That is exactly the 2-sentence argument for why you should be doing them. The reverse grip on any triceps extension or press down changes the wrist position, which changes the elbow angle, which changes the way force is distributed across the 3 triceps heads. It also makes momentum essentially impossible because the mechanical disadvantage of the grip forces a slow, controlled movement, whether you intend to be controlled or not. That loss of control is a tax the muscle pays in additional effort. There's another benefit rarely discussed. The lateral head of the triceps, the one responsible for the horseshoe appearance on the outer arm, responds differently to variations in wrist position. Reverse grip press downs, when performed with controlled descent and a genuine pause of full extension, create a contraction in the lateral head that forward grip press downs miss. It's not dramatic, but in the detailed work before a competition, every granular improvement in the horseshoe separation mattered enormously. The men at Vince's gym in the 1960s and early 1970s used reverse grip variations not as a primary movement, but as a secondary exercise to address specific development gaps. Gironda assigned the clients whose triceps looked flat rather than peaked. The movement was targeted, not random. That's the difference between old school programming and modern throw everything at the wall methodology. Number 13. Alternating heavy cheat and strict clean sets. This is where modern training culture and golden era training culture are in their most fundamental disagreement. And the golden era is right. The current orthodoxy is strict form on everything. Full range, controlled eccentrics, zero momentum. If you can't complete the rep with textbook execution, the weight is too heavy and you should lower it. This is a position of every science-based coach, every corrective exercise specialist, and every personal trainer certified in the last 15 years. It's also a philosophy that has produced exactly zero arms worth talking about. The golden era, men used a different model. Heavy, loose, body English curls came first. Sets where the weight was genuinely supermaximal for strict execution, and the whole body contributed to get the bar moving. Hips drove into the motion. The torso leaned back. The bar swung. The point was to overload the biceps in the shortened position with a weight it couldn't handle strictly, forcing the muscle to encounter loads it never would through textbook form alone. Then, immediately after, they shifted to strict preacher or concentration work with significantly lighter weight. The muscle, having just been exposed to the heavier load, responded to the lighter strict work with an intensity it could never produce on fresh. The strict sets acted as a finisher for the heavy cheating sets, and the cheating sets prepared the muscle for a level of recruitment that strict isolation work alone never reached. Arnold Schwarzenegger trained this way systematically. His barbell curl sets in the early 1970s, filmed at Gold's and documented by writers who visited during his preparation for the 1972 and 1974 Mr. Olympia, show a curl technique that nobody would call strict. Weight moving, torso rocking, the entire body helping the bar complete its path. Then he moved the preacher curls and stripped the form completely clean. 2 movements, 2 purposes, 1 arm session. The combination built one of the most recognized pairs of biceps in the sport's history. What this requires is understanding that deliberate cheating is not sloppy training. It's a loading strategy. The cheat rep recruits the target muscle under a load it can't handle strictly, which creates a stimulus for adaptation that strict loading alone cannot provide. Followed immediately by strict work, it becomes a complete training approach rather than an excuse for bad form. The distinction matters, and the current generation of science-based trainers has collapsed it entirely by treating all momentum as invalid. They're wrong. The arms from that era prove it. Number 14. Mid-range peak contraction holds. The standard instruction for both curls and triceps work is to squeeze hard at the top of the movement. That's not wrong. But it's also not where most arm muscles are under their greatest working tension, and the men who actually studied their own training in that era understood the difference between a genuine peak contraction and a comfortable squeeze at the position of least resistance. For most curl variations, the peak of the resistance curve, the point at which the biceps is doing the maximum amount of work against gravity and leverage simultaneously, falls slightly below the fully contracted top position, right around the midpoint of concentric, where the forearm is roughly parallel to the floor and the mechanical moment arm on the elbow joint is at its longest. That is where the muscle is working hardest. That is where the pause belongs. Holding that position, even for 1 or 2 full seconds, for several reps in a working set, changes the stimulus completely. The muscle can't skate through its hard zone. It can't use momentum or leverage to rush past the most demanding part of the movement. It has to stay there and produce force. Frank Zane trained this way as part of his meticulous pre-competition preparation throughout the late 1970s. He won 3 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles from 1977 to 1979, with physique built as much on precision of muscular detail as on sheer size. Zane's arm training was not a mass-building program. It was an information-gathering process. He identified exactly where each muscle needed more time under load, and then systematically provided it, rep by rep, hold by hold. He didn't look like he was training hard in the conventional sense. He looked like he was studying something. He was... Number 15. Pre-exhausting biceps before pull day. This is the one that contradicts what you've been told, and it's worth being direct about why the current advice stops short of a fuller picture. The modern recommendation is to never pre-exhaust a smaller muscle before the compound movements that rely on it. Don't train biceps before back day. Don't fatigue the elbow flexors before rows and pull downs, because then your back won't be able to work to capacity. The logic is sound as far as it goes, but it stops short of something the golden era men understood through trial and error. When you perform several focus, high-tension biceps sets before beginning your pull session, the biceps enter the subsequent rows, chins, and pull-downs in a partially fatigued state. That fatigue does not disappear, but it also doesn't prevent the lats and upper back from doing their work. What it does is force the lats to carry a greater share of the load during the pulling movements, because the biceps can no longer contribute at full capacity. The result is that you get better back development from the pull session, while the biceps simultaneously receive additional volume and blood flow from the pulling work done while already depleted. Bill Pearl structured his splits this way during certain phases of his competitive preparation in the 1960s. His arm development was remarkable specifically because he didn't treat arm training as an isolated event. It bled into other sessions intentionally. The biceps got hit from multiple angles, in multiple states of fatigue, across the week. Pearl won his first NABBE Universe title in 1953 and was still competing with extraordinary muscularity well into the following decade. His longevity and consistency pointed directly back to the way he structured his overall program, not just individual workouts. Nobody recommends this now because it violates the clean separation of muscle groups that modern programming is built on. But if your biceps training has been stalling and your pull sessions have been feeling mechanical and passionless, it's worth asking whether clean separation is actually serving you or just making your training easier to schedule. Number 16. The 100 rep cable or band flush finisher. The golden era arm sessions often ended with something that looked completely undignified. Lightweight, high reps, continuous motion. Not the failure in the conventional sense, but to the point where the skin on the forearm felt like it was in a split and the pump was almost painful. This was capillarization work, though they wouldn't have called it that. The principle was simple. Force massive amounts of blood into the arms at the end of the session, when the muscle tissue had already been broken down and was primed to receive nutrients. The high rep flush opened the capillary beds, delivered circulation to every corner of the trained muscle, and created an immediate physical effect that told you something real was happening at a tissue level. 100 reps of cable curls with a lightweight or resistance band. Continuous, nonstop, moving at a moderate pace with no lockout and no pause. The muscle never gets to rest. By 50 reps it burns. By 70 it's unpleasant. By 100 it's memorable. Sergio Oliva, who had arguably the greatest pair of arms in the sport's history, a man whose biceps peak in the front made other champions look like amateurs, trained with high-rep finishers as a consistent part of his arm sessions throughout his career. His training at the Duncan YMCA in Chicago in the 1960s was high volume and high frequency in a way that contradicted everything about the low-rep, high-intensity doctrine that Arthur Jones would later promote as the only valid approach. Oliva finished sessions with pumps, not single set to failure. His arm suggested he had the better argument. End your next arm session with this. If you're not doing it already, you'll understand immediately why they never stopped. 16 tricks, all of them old, none of them complicated. Every single one of them sitting in plain sight in gyms and training halls for 50 years while the industry walked past them looking for the next innovation. The arms that came out of the golden era didn't happen because those men had better drugs or better genetics. They happened because those men paid attention to things most people write off as irrelevant. Grip position, elbow angle, the exact tension at the hardest point of each rep. The finisher that ended the session when everyone else had already showered and gone home. They cared about information that doesn't show up in a before and after photo. The question is whether you care about that information too, or whether you'd rather keep doing what everyone else is doing and wondering why your arms look exactly like everyone else's. The gym